In 1851, the Sacramento River carried more than just sediment and gold flakes downstream. It carried secrets that would remain buried for over a century, secrets that speak to the darkest corners of human nature during one of America's most transformative periods. The California gold rush had drawn thousands of desperate souls westward, men and women willing to risk everything for the promise of fortune. But in the remote mining camps scattered throughout the Sierra Nevada foothills, far from the reach of law and civilization, some risks proved far more deadly than others. Catherine Harris arrived in Sacramento County during the spring of 1851, one of the few unmarried women to venture into the gold fields without family protection. At 23 years of age, she possessed a determination that both impressed and unsettled the miners who encountered her along the dusty trails leading to the camps. According to parish records later discovered in a damaged ledger from St. Joseph's Church, Catherine had traveled alone from Missouri, carrying nothing more than a leather satchel containing her deceased father's mining tools and a faded daguerreotype of her family's farm. The mining camp where Catherine eventually settled was known simply as Prospect Gulch, a collection of canvas tents and rough wooden structures perched precariously on the banks of a seasonal creek that fed into the American River. The camp housed approximately 40 miners during its peak months, most of them single men from various corners of the eastern United States. Among them was James Mitchell, a 26-year-old former blacksmith from Pennsylvania who had arrived in California 2 years earlier with modest success in the goldfields. James Mitchell's name appears repeatedly in the fragmentary records that survive from Prospect Gulch, often in connection with disputes over claims and accusations of claim jumping. A letter discovered in 1962 among the papers of a deceased Sacramento historian describes Mitchell as a man of medium build, with prematurely gray hair and hands scarred from years of metal work. The letter, written by a miner named Thomas Webb, mentions Mitchell's reputation for keeping to himself and his unusual habit of working his claim well into the night hours when other miners had retired to their tents. The relationship between Catherine Harris and James Mitchell began, according to surviving accounts, in late May of 1851, when Catherine purchased a small claim adjacent to Mitchell's holding for the sum of $30 in gold dust. The transaction was recorded in a leather-bound notebook that belonged to the camp's informal leader, a former ship captain named Samuel Porter, who had established himself as the closest thing to authority the settlement possessed. Porter's notes, written in a cramped hand and often interrupted by water stains and tears in the paper, indicate that Catherine's arrival caused considerable discussion among the other miners, most of whom had never encountered a woman working a claim independently. The initial weeks of Catherine's residency in Prospect Gulch passed without incident. She established herself in a small canvas shelter reinforced with wooden planks and set about working her claim with methodical precision. Several miners later recalled that Catherine possessed an unusual understanding of mining techniques, skills that seemed to exceed what most newcomers brought to the goldfields. Her father's tools, they noted, showed signs of extensive use and careful maintenance, suggesting a family background in mining that extended beyond the California rush. James Mitchell was among the first to offer assistance to Catherine, though the nature of their early interactions remains unclear from the surviving documentation. A diary fragment attributed to Catherine herself, discovered during a 1968 archaeological survey of the former campsite, contains references to conversations with a man identified only by the initial M. The diary entries, written in faded ink on pages that crumble at the edges, suggest a relationship that developed gradually over the course of several weeks, moving from neighborly cooperation to something approaching partnership. The summer of 1851 proved particularly harsh for the miners of Prospect Gulch. Extended periods of drought reduced the seasonal creek to a trickle, making the washing of gold-bearing gravel increasingly difficult. Several miners abandoned their claims entirely, loading their possessions onto pack mules and heading toward more promising locations deeper in the Sierra Nevada. Those who remained faced not only the challenge of reduced water flow, but also increasing tensions over access to the limited resources still available. It was during this period of hardship that the first signs of trouble began to emerge. Samuel Porter's notebook contains several entries from July and August describing disputes between miners, accusations of theft, and growing suspicion among the camp's residents. One entry, dated August 14th, mentions a confrontation between James Mitchell and two other miners over water rights, a dispute that reportedly required Porter's intervention to prevent violence. The notebook also references increasing concerns about Catherine's presence in the camp, with some miners suggesting that a woman's involvement in the mining operations was bringing bad luck to the entire settlement. Catherine's diary provides a different perspective on these developments. Her entries from late summer describe growing isolation and suspicion from the other miners, but also mention increasing reliance on James Mitchell for protection and support. One particularly revealing passage, written in September, describes Mitchell as the only person in the camp who treated her with genuine respect, though she notes certain behaviors that troubled her. The passage mentions Mitchell's habit of disappearing for hours at a time without explanation, and his reluctance to discuss his past or his long-term plans for his mining operations. The first significant incident occurred on September 23, 1851, when Catherine discovered what appeared to be a previously unknown vein of gold-bearing quartz running beneath both her claim and a portion of Mitchell's adjacent holding. Her diary describes the discovery in careful detail, noting the unusual color and consistency of the ore and estimating its potential value at several $1,000s. She also records her decision to share this information with Mitchell, believing that their adjacent claims would require cooperative mining to extract the full value of the deposit. Mitchell's reaction to Catherine's discovery marked a turning point in their relationship. According to Catherine's diary, Mitchell immediately suggested that they formalize their partnership through a written agreement that would ensure equal sharing of any profits from the new vein. He proposed that they begin extensive excavation work to determine the full extent of the deposit, work that would require digging a substantial shaft into the hillside behind their claims. Catherine agreed to this proposal, though her diary entries suggest some hesitation about the scope of the proposed excavation. The mining shaft that Mitchell and Catherine began digging in early October would eventually extend more than 20 feet into the hillside, supported by timber beams that Mitchell claimed to have experience constructing from his background as a blacksmith. The work proceeded slowly, with both miners taking turns underground while the other remained on the surface to haul up debris and monitor for signs of danger. Catherine's diary describes the claustrophobic conditions within the shaft and her growing unease about the stability of Mitchell's timber supports, which she noted seemed hastily constructed and inadequately braced. Other miners in Prospect Gulch began to take notice of the extensive excavation work being conducted by Mitchell and Catherine. Samuel Porter's notebook contains several entries from October questioning the safety of their operations and expressing concern about the potential for cave-ins that might affect other claims in the area. Porter notes that he attempted to discuss these concerns with Mitchell on multiple occasions, but was repeatedly assured that the excavation was proceeding according to proper mining techniques and posed no danger to the surrounding area. The events of October 31, 1851, would forever change the nature of the Prospect Gulch settlement and create a mystery that would persist for more than a century. Catherine's diary contains no entries beyond October 30th, But the final entry provides crucial insight into the circumstances that led to the tragedy. She writes of increasing anxiety about the mining shaft, noting that recent rainfall had caused water to seep into the lower portions of the excavation, and that several of the timber supports showed signs of stress and movement. On the morning of October 31st, according to testimony later given by Samuel Porter to a travelling magistrate, Catherine and Mitchell descended into the shaft together to assess the condition of the supports and determine whether work could continue safely. Porter notes that he observed both individuals entering the excavation around 9 o'clock in the morning, and that he expected them to emerge within an hour or two, as had been their usual practice. When no signs of activity emerged from the shaft by mid-afternoon, Porter became concerned and approached the excavation site to investigate. He found the entrance to the shaft partially blocked by fallen timber and loose rock. With no sounds of movement coming from within, Porter immediately called for assistance from the other miners in the camp, and within an hour a rescue effort was underway to clear the obstruction and determine the fate of the 2 miners trapped below. The rescue operation continued through the night and into the following day. The miners worked in shifts to remove debris and shore up the unstable portions of the shaft, but progress was slow and dangerous. Several of the rescuers noted that the collapse appeared to have been sudden and complete, suggesting that the timber supports had failed simultaneously rather than gradually. By the evening of November 1st, the rescuers had cleared enough debris to access the lower portions of the shaft. What they discovered there would haunt the survivors of Prospect Gulch for the rest of their lives. James Mitchell was found alive but severely injured, trapped beneath a fallen beam approximately 15 feet below the surface. He was unconscious and appeared to have suffered injuries to his legs and back, but he was breathing and showed signs of life. Catherine Harris was found several feet deeper in the shaft, pinned beneath a much larger section of collapsed timber and rock. She showed no signs of life and appeared to have been dead for some time. The rescue of James Mitchell required another full day of careful excavation. The fallen beam that trapped him was too heavy to lift directly, requiring the rescuers to dig around it and carefully extract him piece by piece. During this process, several of the miners noted unusual aspects of the collapse that troubled them, but which they did not immediately understand. The pattern of fallen timber and rock suggested that the collapse had begun at the deepest point of the shaft and worked its way upward, trapping Catherine first and Mitchell closer to the surface. Mitchell remained unconscious for 3 days following his rescue. When he finally regained awareness on November 5th, his account of the events in the shaft raised immediate questions among the other miners. He claimed to have no memory of the actual collapse, stating that he recalled entering the shaft with Catherine to inspect the supports, but that his next clear memory was awakening in Samuel Porter's tent with his injuries. He expressed profound grief over Catherine's death and insisted that he had done everything possible to save her during the collapse. However, several aspects of Mitchell's story troubled the miners who had participated in the rescue operation. Most significantly, the position in which Mitchell was found suggested that he had been moving toward the shaft entrance when the collapse occurred, while Catherine had been deeper underground. This contradicted Mitchell's claim that they had been working together to inspect the supports at the deepest point of the excavation. Additionally, the injuries Mitchell sustained, while serious, were not consistent with being trapped for more than 24 hours. Yet he claimed to have been unconscious in the shaft from the morning of October 31st until the rescue operation reached him. Samuel Porter recorded these concerns in his notebook, but noted that without additional evidence, there was little the miners could do beyond express their suspicions. The nearest legal authority was more than 50 miles away in Sacramento, and the difficulties of travel and communication made a formal investigation impractical. Porter did note that several miners suggested Mitchell should be required to leave Prospect Gulch, but this proposal was opposed by others, who argued that the evidence against him was purely circumstantial. The burial of Catherine Harris took place on November 7, 1851, in a small cemetery that the miners had established on a hill overlooking the camp. Samuel Porter conducted the service, reading from a Bible that belonged to one of the other miners and offering what comfort he could to the assembled mourners. Mitchell attended the service despite his injuries, supported by crutches fashioned from mining timber. Porter noted that Mitchell's behavior during the ceremony was appropriate and showed genuine grief, though several other miners commented on what they perceived as his eagerness to discuss the future disposition of Catherine's claim and personal possessions. The question of Catherine's mining claim became a source of significant tension in the weeks following her death. Mitchell argued that their verbal partnership agreement gave him rights to continue working both claims, particularly the valuable quartz vein that Catherine had discovered. However, other miners pointed out that no written documentation of this agreement existed, and that under California mining law, Catherine's claim should revert to public availability or be claimed by her next of kin, if any could be located. A letter discovered in 1964 among the papers of a San Francisco law firm provides additional insight into the dispute over Catherine's claim. The letter, written by a Sacramento attorney named William Hayes, indicates that Mitchell had approached him in November 1851, seeking legal advice about establishing ownership of both mining claims. Hayes's correspondence suggests that he found Mitchell's story suspicious and advised him that without proper documentation, his claims to Catherine's property would likely not stand up to legal scrutiny. Despite these legal uncertainties, Mitchell continued to work both claims throughout the winter of 1851 and into the following spring. Other miners in Prospect Gulch reported that he seemed to have made significant progress in extracting gold from the quartz vein, though he was secretive about the exact nature and value of his findings. Porter's notebook contains several entries from this period describing Mitchell's increasingly antisocial behavior and his apparent paranoia about other miners attempting to stake claims on his expanded territory. The spring of 1852 brought changes to Prospect Gulch that would ultimately lead to the dissolution of the mining camp. Several new prospectors arrived, seeking to establish claims in the area, drawn by rumors of significant gold discoveries. Among these newcomers was a group that included Catherine's younger brother, Robert Harris, who had traveled from Missouri after receiving word of his sister's death through correspondence with church authorities in Sacramento. Robert Harris's arrival at Prospect Gulch on April 15, 1852, created immediate tension with James Mitchell. According to Samuel Porter's notes, Harris demanded to examine his sister's claim and personal effects, and questioned Mitchell extensively about the circumstances of her death. Harris had brought with him several documents that he claimed proved his legal right to inherit his sister's property, including a will that Catherine had apparently drafted before leaving Missouri. The confrontation between Robert Harris and James Mitchell escalated quickly. Harris accused Mitchell of being responsible for Catherine's death and demanded that he surrender control of her mining claim immediately. Mitchell responded that he had legitimate rights to the claim based on his partnership agreement with Catherine, and that he would not be intimidated by unfounded accusations. The dispute required intervention by Samuel Porter and several other miners to prevent violence. Robert Harris's investigation into his sister's death revealed several disturbing details that had not been apparent to the other miners at Prospect Gulch. Most significantly, Harris discovered among Catherine's possessions a letter that she had apparently written but never sent, dated October 29, 1851. The letter, addressed to a friend in Missouri, expressed serious concerns about James Mitchell's behavior and suggested that Catherine had begun to suspect him of dishonesty regarding their mining partnership. The letter described Mitchell's increasingly possessive attitude toward both Catherine and the mining claims, and noted several instances where he had made statements that suggested he believed himself entitled to the full value of any discoveries made on either claim. Most disturbing, the letter mentioned Catherine's growing fear that Mitchell might attempt to harm her if she tried to end their partnership or claim her rightful share of the profits from the quartz vein. Additional evidence emerged when Robert Harris examined the mining shaft where his sister had died. Despite the passage of several months and the continued excavation work conducted by Mitchell, Harris noted several aspects of the collapse site that troubled him. Most significantly, he observed that the timber supports appeared to have been deliberately weakened in several locations, with cut marks that suggested intentional sabotage rather than natural failure due to stress or weather conditions. Harris brought these concerns to Samuel Porter and requested that a formal investigation be conducted into the circumstances of his sister's death. Porter noted in his journal that while he shared Harris's suspicions about Mitchell, the practical difficulties of conducting such an investigation remained significant. The evidence was largely circumstantial, witnesses were few, and the passage of time had made it difficult to reconstruct the exact sequence of events that led to the shaft collapse. Nevertheless, Porter agreed to convene a meeting of all the miners remaining at Prospect Gulch to examine the evidence and determine what action, if any, should be taken regarding Mitchell. The meeting took place on April 22, 1852, in Porter's tent, with 8 miners participating as a sort of informal jury. Robert Harris presented his evidence, including Catherine's unfinished letter and his observations about the damaged timber supports. Mitchell's defense of his actions was largely consistent with his previous statements, though several miners noted that his story contained new details that had not appeared in his earlier accounts. Most significantly, Mitchell now claimed that Catherine had been behaving erratically in the days before the collapse, expressing paranoid fears about the other miners and suggesting that someone was attempting to sabotage their excavation work. He suggested that Catherine herself might have damaged the timber supports, either accidentally or deliberately. The informal tribunal deliberated for several hours before reaching a decision that satisfied no one completely. While the miners acknowledged that the evidence against Mitchell was troubling, they concluded that it was not sufficient to prove his guilt beyond reasonable doubt. However, they also determined that the circumstances surrounding Catherine's death created enough suspicion that Mitchell should not be permitted to continue working her claim. The resolution required Mitchell to surrender Catherine's mining claim to her brother Robert Harris, while retaining ownership of his original claim. Additionally, Mitchell was required to divide equally any gold that he had extracted from the disputed quartz vein since Catherine's death. Porter noted that Mitchell accepted these terms reluctantly, but without further argument, perhaps recognizing that the alternative might be expulsion from the camp entirely. Robert Harris worked his sister's claim for approximately 6 weeks following the tribunal decision. During this period, he made several additional discoveries that shed new light on the events of October 31st. Most significantly, Harris found evidence that the quartz vein extended much further into the hillside than either Catherine or Mitchell had initially realized, suggesting that the potential value of the discovery was substantially greater than anyone had understood. More disturbing, Harris discovered what appeared to be a deliberately concealed chamber within the mining shaft, hidden behind loose rock and timber that had been carefully arranged to appear natural. The chamber contained several items that had belonged to Catherine, including jewelry and personal papers that Mitchell had claimed were lost in the collapse. Among these items was a second letter, This one dated October 30th, the day before Catherine's death. This final letter provided the most damning evidence against James Mitchell. Written in Catherine's hand but never sent, the letter detailed her growing suspicions about Mitchell's intentions and her decision to end their partnership immediately. She wrote that she had discovered Mitchell removing gold from the quartz vein without her knowledge, and that she had confronted him about this theft the evening before her death. Most significantly, Catherine wrote that she feared for her safety and had decided to leave Prospect Gulch within days, taking her share of the gold and abandoning her claim rather than continuing to work with Mitchell. The letter also revealed that Catherine had attempted to document the extent of Mitchell's theft by secretly measuring the amount of gold-bearing ore that had been extracted from their shared excavation. Her calculations suggested that Mitchell had removed substantially more gold than he had reported, keeping the difference for himself while claiming that the vein was less productive than Catherine believed. Robert Harris immediately brought this new evidence to Samuel Porter and demanded that Mitchell be arrested and held for trial by proper authorities. However, when Porter and Harris went to Mitchell's claim to confront him with the evidence, they discovered that Mitchell had disappeared during the night, taking with him all of his possessions and any gold he had accumulated during his time at Prospect Gulch. A search of the surrounding area revealed that Mitchell had apparently planned his departure carefully. His tent and mining equipment had been removed, and the shaft on his original claim had been carefully filled in and disguised to prevent other miners from determining how much gold he had extracted. Several miners reported seeing tracks leading away from the camp toward the main trail to Sacramento, but Mitchell himself was nowhere to be found. Samuel Porter sent word to authorities in Sacramento describing Mitchell's flight and requesting that he be apprehended if he attempted to sell large quantities of gold in the city. However, the response from Sacramento indicated that no one matching Mitchell's description had been observed, and that the difficulties of tracking a single individual across the vast and largely unmapped territories of the gold country made capture unlikely. Robert Harris continued to work his sister's claim through the summer of 1852, but the emotional toll of the discoveries he had made regarding her death proved overwhelming. In a letter to relatives in Missouri dated August 10th, Harris described his intention to abandon the claim and return home, writing that no amount of gold could compensate for the loss of his sister or provide satisfaction for the injustice of her death. The abandonment of Catherine's claim marked the beginning of the end for Prospect Gulch as a mining camp. Several other miners had already departed for more promising locations, and the remaining residents found it increasingly difficult to maintain the infrastructure and cooperation necessary for successful mining operations. By the winter of 1852, only Samuel Porter and 2 other miners remained, and they too eventually departed for other locations. Porter's final journal entries from Prospect Gulch, written in December 1852, reflect on the tragedy that had befallen the camp and its lasting impact on those who witnessed it. He noted that the events surrounding Catherine Harris's death had destroyed the sense of community and mutual trust that had previously characterized the settlement, replacing it with suspicion and fear that made continued cooperation impossible. The site of Prospect Gulch remained abandoned for several years following the departure of the last miners. Occasional prospectors visited the area seeking to rework the abandoned claims, but none established permanent settlements. The timber structures gradually deteriorated, and the mining shafts were eventually filled in by erosion and debris, leaving little visible evidence of the camp's existence. In 1858, a traveling correspondent for the Sacramento Union newspaper visited the abandoned site while researching a series of articles about ghost towns in the gold country. His published account, which appeared in the newspaper on November 15th of that year, provided one of the first public descriptions of the events at Prospect Gulch and the mysterious death of Catherine Harris. The article attracted considerable attention and prompted several readers to come forward with additional information about James Mitchell and his activities following his departure from the camp. Most significantly, a Sacramento merchant named David Fletcher contacted the newspaper claiming that Mitchell had sold him substantial quantities of gold dust and nuggets in November 1851, shortly after Catherine's death. Fletcher's records indicated that the gold Mitchell sold was unusually pure and appeared to have come from a particularly rich vein, consistent with Catherine's discovery at Prospect Gulch. Fletcher also noted that Mitchell had seemed nervous and eager to complete the transaction quickly, paying for his purchases with gold rather than currency, and avoiding questions about the source of his wealth. Additional reports emerged from other merchants and traders who claimed to have dealt with Mitchell during the winter of 1851 and the spring of 1852. These accounts suggested that Mitchell had accumulated substantial wealth during his time at Prospect Gulch, far more than would have been expected from his original claim alone. Several witnesses described Mitchell as secretive and paranoid, frequently looking over his shoulder and avoiding areas where he might encounter other miners from the gold fields. The most intriguing lead came from a letter written to the Sacramento Union by a woman named Margaret Thompson, who claimed that Mitchell had courted her during the spring of 1852 while using the false name William Carter. Thompson described Mitchell as charming but evasive about his past, claiming to be a successful merchant from the East who had come to California to invest in real estate rather than to mine for gold. She noted that Mitchell had possessed considerable wealth and had spoken frequently about his plans to purchase land and establish a business in San Francisco. Thompson's letter also revealed that Mitchell had abruptly ended their courtship in May 1852, after apparently learning that authorities were seeking information about his activities at Prospect Gulch. She wrote that Mitchell had claimed to be called away on urgent business matters, but had left behind several personal items, including a distinctive pocket watch that Thompson had admired. Her description of the watch matched one that Robert Harris remembered belonging to his sister Catherine, suggesting that Mitchell had kept personal items from his victims as trophies. The investigation into Mitchell's whereabouts continued sporadically for several years, but no definitive evidence of his location or activities ever emerged. Some reports suggested that he had traveled to Oregon or Washington Territory, while others claimed that he had returned to the East using assumed names and false documentation. A few witnesses claimed to have seen him in various California towns, but none of these sightings were ever confirmed. In 1863, more than a decade after Catherine Harris's death, a significant discovery was made at the site of the former Prospect Gulch camp. A group of surveyors working for the Central Pacific Railroad discovered additional human remains while conducting preliminary surveys for a potential rail line through the area. The remains were found in a previously unknown shaft located approximately 200 yards from the site where Catherine had died, hidden beneath years of accumulated debris and vegetation. The condition and location of these remains raised new questions about the events at Prospect Gulch. Forensic examination, conducted by a physician from Sacramento, determined that the remains were those of a male individual who had died from what appeared to be blunt force trauma to the head. Personal effects found with the body included mining tools and clothing consistent with the 1850s time period, but no identification documents were discovered. Most intriguingly, the hidden shaft where the remains were found contained evidence of significant gold extraction, including traces of mercury and other chemicals used in gold processing. The shaft appeared to have been deliberately concealed after the individual's death, with the entrance carefully disguised to prevent discovery. This suggested that someone had been conducting secret mining operations in the area and had been killed, possibly for the gold they had discovered. Some investigators theorized that these remains might belong to James Mitchell, suggesting that he had not escaped Prospect Gulch as previously believed, but had instead been killed by unknown assailants, possibly other miners who had discovered his role in Catherine's death. However, this theory could not be definitively proven, and the identity of the remains was never established with certainty. The discovery of the additional remains prompted renewed interest in the Catherine Harris case and led to a more systematic investigation of the entire Prospect Gulch area. Archaeologists and historians conducted extensive excavations during the summer of 1864, uncovering evidence of much more extensive mining operations than had been previously understood. The excavations revealed a network of interconnected shafts and tunnels that suggested multiple individuals had been working the claims in secret, possibly without the knowledge of the official camp residents. Among the artifacts recovered during these excavations were several items that appeared to belong to Catherine Harris, including pieces of jewelry that matched descriptions provided by her brother Robert. Most significantly, the archaeologists discovered what appeared to be a carefully hidden cache of gold nuggets and dust, buried in a waterproof container approximately 50 yards from where Catherine's body had been found. The discovery of Catherine's hidden gold cache suggested that she had been more successful in her mining operations than anyone had previously realized, and that she had taken precautions to protect her wealth from potential thieves. The amount of gold found in the cache was substantial, estimated at several $1,000s in 1860s values, representing a fortune that would have provided financial security for life. This discovery also provided additional evidence of James Mitchell's motive for murder. If Catherine had accumulated such significant wealth, and Mitchell was aware of it, his incentive to eliminate her and claim her property would have been substantial. The location of the cache, carefully hidden and accessible only to someone familiar with Catherine's daily routines and habits, suggested that Mitchell might have forced her to reveal its location before killing her. The final significant development in the Catherine Harris case occurred in 1869. When a dying man in a San Francisco hospital claimed to possess information about the murders at Prospect Gulch. The man, who identified himself as Thomas Mitchell, claimed to be the younger brother of James Mitchell, and stated that James had confessed to him the details of Catherine's murder before his own death several years earlier. According to Thomas Mitchell's deathbed statement, James had indeed deliberately caused the collapse of the mining shaft to kill Catherine Harris and claim her wealth for himself. Thomas claimed that James had spent weeks carefully weakening the timber supports in specific locations, calculating the exact amount of damage necessary to cause a collapse that would kill Catherine while allowing him to survive with believable injuries. The statement also revealed that James Mitchell had not escaped Prospect Gulch undetected, as previously believed. According to his brother, James had been confronted by Robert Harris and Samuel Porter shortly before his planned departure, and had been forced to defend himself in a violent struggle. During this confrontation, James had killed Robert Harris with a mining pick, then disposed of the body in a hidden shaft before fleeing the camp. This revelation, if true, would explain the mysterious remains discovered by the railroad surveyors in 1863. It also provided a darker explanation for Robert Harris's apparent departure from Prospect Gulch, which historical records had attributed to his decision to return to Missouri, but which had never been independently verified through correspondence or other documentation. Thomas Mitchell's statement concluded with the claim that James had ultimately been killed by unknown assailants in Oregon Territory sometime during the winter of 1855, and that he had been buried in an unmarked grave near a logging camp, whose exact location Thomas could not remember. James had allegedly spent his final years consumed by paranoia and guilt, convinced that he was being pursued by the spirits of his victims, and unable to enjoy the wealth he had obtained through murder. The credibility of Thomas Mitchell's deathbed confession remained questionable, as no independent verification of his identity or relationship to James Mitchell could be established. Hospital records indicated that the dying man had been brought in as an indigent with no identification or personal effects, and his knowledge of the events at Prospect Gulch could have been obtained through newspaper accounts or other public sources rather than from direct family connection. Nevertheless, the confession provided the most detailed account of the crimes that had been recorded, and many elements of the story were consistent with the physical evidence and witness testimony that had been gathered over the years. The description of the method used to cause the mining shaft collapse matched the observations made by various investigators, and the motive described for the murders was consistent with the evidence of Catherine's hidden wealth and Mitchell's suspicious behavior. The case of Catherine Harris and James Mitchell was officially closed by Sacramento County authorities in 1869 following Thomas Mitchell's confession, though many questions remained unanswered. The exact locations of several key pieces of evidence, including the remains believed to belong to Robert Harris and the grave where James Mitchell was allegedly buried, were never determined with certainty. Modern archaeologists who have studied the Prospect Gulch site note that the area continues to yield evidence of the tragic events that occurred there more than a century ago. Recent excavations have uncovered additional artifacts that support the general outline of the story, including mining tools that bear the distinctive markings described in historical accounts and personal items that appear to match descriptions of belongings owned by the victims. The site itself has become a subject of interest for historians studying the social dynamics of Gold Rush-era mining camps and the particular vulnerabilities faced by women in the largely male-dominated frontier environment. Catherine Harris's story illustrates the extreme isolation and lack of legal protection that characterized life in the remote mining regions, where disputes were resolved through informal tribunals and justice often depended on the goodwill and integrity of one's neighbors. The legacy of the Prospect Gulch murders extends beyond the immediate tragedy to encompass broader themes about greed, isolation, and the corrupting influence of sudden wealth during one of America's most transformative historical periods. The California Gold Rush attracted individuals from all walks of life, including many who saw the chaos and lawlessness of the frontier as an opportunity to reinvent themselves or escape the consequences of past actions. James Mitchell's apparent transformation from a respectable blacksmith to a calculating murderer illustrates the extreme psychological pressures faced by many Gold Rush participants. The combination of isolation, competition for resources, and the constant possibility of sudden wealth or devastating loss created an environment where normal social constraints often broke down, and individuals were forced to confront the darkest aspects of their own nature. The story also highlights the particular dangers faced by women who ventured into the goldfields, whether independently or as part of family groups. Catherine Harris's determination to work her own claim and maintain her independence, while admirable, placed her in an extremely vulnerable position where she had little recourse against men who viewed her success as a threat or an opportunity for exploitation. Perhaps most troubling is the evidence that Catherine Harris was aware of the danger she faced and had taken steps to protect herself, yet was ultimately unable to escape the violence that men like James Mitchell brought to the frontier environment. Her hidden letters and careful concealment of her wealth suggest that she understood the risks of her situation, but believed that caution and planning would be sufficient to ensure her survival. The failure of the informal justice system at Prospect Gulch to protect Catherine, or to adequately punish her killer reflects the broader inadequacies of frontier law enforcement during the gold rush era. While Samuel Porter and the other miners eventually developed suspicions about James Mitchell's role in Catherine's death, their unwillingness to take decisive action based on circumstantial evidence allowed him to escape and potentially claim additional victims. The physical evidence discovered at the Prospect Gulch site over the decades since the original murders provides compelling support for the general outline of the story, though many specific details remain matters of speculation. The deliberate concealment of evidence, the hidden caches of wealth, and the complex network of mining shafts all suggest a level of premeditation and calculation that transforms what might have appeared to be an accident into a carefully planned series of crimes. Modern forensic techniques have provided additional insights into the events at Prospect Gulch, though the passage of time and the deterioration of evidence have limited the scope of what can be definitively determined. Soil analysis has confirmed the presence of mercury and other gold-processing chemicals at multiple locations throughout the former campsite, supporting the theory that extensive secret mining operations were conducted in the area. The story of Catherine Harris continues to resonate with contemporary audiences as an example of both the opportunities and the dangers that characterized America's frontier period. Her courage in pursuing an independent life in the gold fields, combined with the tragic circumstances of her death, has made her a symbolic figure for historians studying women's experiences during westward expansion. The mystery surrounding James Mitchell's ultimate fate adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate case. Whether he died as Thomas Mitchell claimed, or whether he successfully disappeared and lived out his life under an assumed identity, remains an open question that continues to intrigue researchers and amateur historians. The legacy of Prospect Gulch serves as a reminder that the romanticized image of the California gold rush obscures a much darker reality of violence, exploitation, and environmental destruction. Behind the stories of sudden wealth and adventurous spirit lay a harsh world where human life was often valued less than the gold that drew so many thousands westward. In the end, the case of Catherine Harris and James Mitchell represents more than just a historical murder mystery. It serves as a window into the complex social dynamics of a transformative period in American history, when rapid change and the pursuit of wealth created both unprecedented opportunities and devastating consequences for those brave enough or desperate enough to seek their fortunes on the frontier. The silence that still hangs over the abandoned site of Prospect Gulch today carries within it the echoes of voices that were silenced more than a century ago, voices that spoke of dreams and fears, of hope and desperation, of the best and worst aspects of human nature when stripped of the civilizing influences of established society. And perhaps, if one listens carefully to the wind through the Sierra Nevada foothills, those voices can still be heard, telling their stories to anyone willing to acknowledge the complex and often tragic reality behind America's golden dreams. The documentation of the Catherine Harris case was officially archived by the California State Historical Society in 1969, filed away among thousands of other unsolved mysteries from the gold rush era. The thick folder containing witness statements, archaeological reports, and fragmented diary entries was stored in a climate-controlled vault in Sacramento, where it remained largely undisturbed for decades. In 1967, just 2 years before the case was formally closed, a final piece of evidence emerged that would provide the most chilling conclusion to the Prospect Gulch tragedy. A construction crew working on a new highway through the Sierra Nevada foothills accidentally uncovered what appeared to be an old mining tunnel approximately 5 miles southeast of the original campsite. Inside this tunnel, preserved by the dry mountain air and protected from decades of weather, investigators found a leather satchel containing personal documents and a final confession written in James Mitchell's own hand. The confession, dated March 15, 1853, provided a detailed account of Mitchell's crimes and his subsequent flight from justice. Written in a cramped, desperate script that suggested extreme psychological distress, Mitchell's final statement revealed not only his guilt in Catherine Harris's murder, but also his responsibility for the death of Robert Harris and two other individuals whose names had never before been connected to the Prospect Gulch events. According to Mitchell's confession, the murder of Catherine Harris had been planned for several weeks before the mining shaft collapse. Mitchell described his growing obsession with the wealth Catherine had accumulated and his conviction that she was deliberately withholding information about additional gold deposits from their partnership. The confession revealed that Mitchell had spent considerable time studying the construction of the mining shaft supports, calculating exactly how much damage would be necessary to cause a fatal collapse, while allowing him to survive with credible injuries. On the morning of October 31st, Mitchell had lured Catherine into the deepest section of the shaft by claiming to have discovered evidence of an even richer vein of gold-bearing ore. Once they were both underground, Mitchell had used a mining pick to knock out several key support beams he had previously weakened, then positioned himself closer to the entrance before triggering the final collapse that killed Catherine instantly. The confession also revealed Mitchell's cold calculation in positioning Catherine's body to make her death appear accidental, while ensuring that any valuable items she carried would be accessible to him once the rescue operation was complete. Mitchell admitted to removing several pieces of jewelry and a small pouch of gold dust from Catherine's body, before allowing the other miners to discover them both. Most disturbing was Mitchell's account of Robert Harris's death, which had occurred exactly as Thomas Mitchell had described in his deathbed statement. When Robert Harris confronted Mitchell with evidence of his sister's murder, Mitchell had struck him down with a mining tool and disposed of the body in a hastily dug grave within the hidden tunnel system that he had been using for his secret mining operations. The confession concluded with Mitchell's description of his final months, spent in constant fear of discovery and haunted by what he described as the voices of his victims. Mitchell wrote that he could no longer sleep without hearing Catherine's voice calling to him from the depths of the collapsed shaft, and that he had begun to see Robert Harris's face in every stranger he encountered on the trails and in the towns where he attempted to hide. Mitchell's final entry described his intention to end his own life, rather than continue living with the weight of his crimes. He wrote that he had chosen the abandoned mining tunnel as his final resting place because it reminded him of the shaft where Catherine had died, and that he hoped his death in a similar location might somehow provide absolution for his actions. The discovery of Mitchell's confession and skeletal remains in the tunnel provided the final confirmation of the events that had destroyed Prospect Gulch more than a century earlier. The physical evidence found with Mitchell's body, including Catherine's jewelry and personal effects that matched Robert Harris's descriptions, left no doubt about his guilt in both murders. The California State Historical Society used Mitchell's confession to officially close the Catherine Harris case, though they noted in their final report that many questions about the broader impact of the murders on the Gold Rush-era mining community would likely never be fully answered. The Society recommended that the Prospect Gulch site be preserved as a historical landmark, recognizing its significance in illustrating the darker aspects of California's frontier period. Today, a small memorial marker stands at the approximate location of the original Prospect Gulch mining camp. The bronze plaque, installed in 1971, bears a simple inscription. in memory of Catherine Harris and Robert Harris, victims of frontier violence, and all those who sought their fortune in these hills and found only tragedy. The site remains largely undisturbed, visited occasionally by historians and amateur archaeologists who continue to search for additional evidence of the events that occurred there. The seasonal creek that once provided water for the mining operations still flows during the spring months, carrying with it sediment that occasionally reveals small fragments of metal and glass from the abandoned camp. Local rangers report that visitors to the memorial site often comment on the unusual silence that seems to pervade the area, a quiet that feels deeper and more profound than the natural stillness of the mountain wilderness. Whether this atmosphere stems from the tragic history of the location or simply from the natural acoustics of the surrounding hills remains a matter of individual interpretation. The story of Catherine Harris has become a cautionary tale taught in university courses on Western American history, illustrating both the opportunities and dangers that characterize the gold rush era. Her determination to maintain her independence in an hostile environment, combined with the tragic circumstances of her death, serves as a powerful reminder of the costs of America's westward expansion. Perhaps most significantly, Catherine's story highlights the vulnerability of women in frontier societies and the inadequacy of informal justice systems in protecting the innocent from those who viewed the chaos of rapid social change as an opportunity for exploitation and violence. Her death, and the deaths of her brother and the unknown others who fell victim to James Mitchell's greed, represent not isolated tragedies, but symptoms of a broader social breakdown that accompanied the pursuit of sudden wealth in lawless territories. The silence that envelops the former site of Prospect Gulch today carries within it the weight of these unresolved tensions and unacknowledged losses. It serves as a reminder that progress often comes at a cost that is only fully understood years or decades after the events themselves, when the excitement of discovery and the promise of wealth have faded, leaving behind only the enduring consequences of choices made in desperation or greed. And in that silence, perhaps, the voices of Catherine Harris and her brother Robert can still be heard, not as supernatural presence, but as historical witnesses to the complex and often tragic reality of the American frontier experience. Their story continues to echo through time, challenging romantic notions of westward expansion and demanding recognition of the human cost of the dreams that drove thousands to seek their fortunes in the California goldfields. The case remains closed. The perpetrator identified, the victims memorialized, but the questions raised by their deaths about justice, greed, and the price of isolation in pursuit of wealth remain as relevant today as they were in 1851, when Catherine Harris first arrived at Prospect Gulch, carrying her father's mining tools and dreams of independence that would ultimately cost her everything.